Hello, we're going to continue with our discussion about business to consumer markets. In particular, in part two, we're going to be discussing consumer decision making processes. Let's start by discussing the types of decisions that customers are actually going to make in the marketplace. We're going to identify four very different types of decisions when it comes down to buying new products or services. The first one is complex buying behavior. This kind of scenario occurs when the customer it's really going through a decision that is particularly important for them. This importance or involvement, high involvement, will be a function of at least two things. One is how intrinsically important that product category is for the customer. There are certain product categories that we like or care about more, maybe because we are collectors of those products, maybe because we just fans or we just like that particular product category. So in my case, it could be that I actually collect watches, and because of that, anytime I'm making a decision about watches, I spend quite a bit of time thinking about it. On the other hand, it could be because the product has a high risk associated with it. This risk could come maybe because financially it's an important purchase. This will be the case with cars or homes for most customers. And that intrinsic risk will make it a complex situation. And on the other hand, we have uh, purchase decisions that are dissonance reducing. What is dissonance? Dissonance is a discomfort that arises in customers after the purchase because they are not sure whether the product or service that they did acquire is indeed the best choice. This is that nagging feeling that you feel sometimes that when you were at the store, you tried different pairs of shoes, and the ones that you actually chose maybe are not indeed the best choice for you. That's what we call dissonance. Now, dissonance reducing buying behavior occurs in situations where maybe the differences between products are smaller, and because of that, it's harder for us to know what is the right decision. And what the customer will do in situations like this is usually try to minimize the regret, and because of that, they will go with a safer choice. So the kind of colors, for example, in clothes that you will actually buy will be safer choices as opposed to trying maybe colors that are less typical. Okay. A different type of situation to that will be habitual buying behavior. That is something that happens with products that we buy on a regular basis, where we have already created some stable preferences. We have already determined what is our favorite salad dressing, and because of that, every time we go to the store and we have in our list the word salad dressing, we know exactly which one we're actually picking. It's almost an automatic process that basically happens without the consumer having to go through a lot of thinking behind it. And finally, we have variety seeking behavior. This is something that happens in situations where uh, the having different choices, it enables the customer to have extra utility or enjoyment out of it. So it could be a simple scenario where I really enjoy a product like yogurt, for example. And because of that, I like to try different brands of yogurt. And just trying different things, it makes my enjoyment superior, even though I do know that I really like a particular yogurt flavor from a particular brand. I might still try different products in a consistent basis just because I enjoy the variety. Now, talking about this distinction, there are two underlying factors that explain these four different purchase situations. On one hand, like you can see over here, we have whether there are significant differences or not, or small differences between the different products. And on the other hand, we have whether the products, the purchase situation is actually a high involvement setting or a low involvement setting. High involvement being something that is particularly of importance to you. I've already discussed briefly that in the previous slides when I was talking about complex buying behavior. So high involvement will be something where there is an inherent risk or importance, and because of that, you're going to spend more time and care when making such decisions. And as you can see, um, the high involvement and significant differences will be complex buying behavior. Uh, the case where we have significant differences and low involvement will be variety seeking. The case where we have few differences and low involvement is habitual buying behavior. And, and finally, when we have few differences and it's particularly important for us, we're going to do dissonance reducing behavior, where we're trying to minimize the chances that we make the wrong decision or try to minimize our regret. Now, we have discussed 4 different types of purchase scenarios, but now we're going to talk about the stages that the customer goes through in each one of these 4. In any of them, you will have a set of processes that are going to happen in the mind of the customer. Okay, and the first step is need recognition. The first thing you need to realize is that there is some sort of disconnect between the ideal state for the customer and the actual state. Uh, then after that, we spend some time finding information about how we can satisfy that need that we have just noticed. Then after that, we are going to go ahead and evaluate the different options or alternatives that we have in the marketplace that could fulfill that need that we have noticed. Next, we will go ahead and decide whether to buy something or not, and if so, which one of the options that we are going to purchase. And finally, we're going to consider or think about post-purchase behavior that is going to arise. So for example, we're going to be talking about things like satisfaction. How happy or unhappy are you with the purchase, and what consequences does this satisfaction have for following purchases? Now let's talk about each of these stages in a little bit more detail. So the first one is need recognition. Notice that when I say need, this could be framed in a positive or a negative way. So we can talk about a need when there is basically a disconnect in a negative sense between the optimal state for the customer and the current state. So for example, I might notice that I'm hungry, right? And I might notice that I'm hungry maybe because my stomach is gurgling, right? That will be an internal stimuli that is actually triggering that need recognition. It could be my thoughts, or it could be in this case a physiological reaction from the body that it's leading me to notice that I'm actually hungry. Okay, so that there is a disconnect between my ideal state, which is not to feel hunger, and my actual state when I actually do. Okay, that's one way in which we can actually recognize a need. The other way this might happen, it's external stimuli. So for example, you might be walking on the street and you suddenly notice this lovely smell of pizza, right? And you didn't think until that point that you were that hungry, but the moment that you smell the pizza, that external stimuli is going to trigger that need recognition stage. And this could happen in a number of ways, obviously. And next, after you have noticed that you actually have a need, we're going to engage in information search. And this information search could be more or less elaborate depending on the type of purchase that we are going to actually undertake. We have already mentioned, for example, in a complex scenario, you spend more time doing information search. What kind of information searches we can actually do? Well, this could be both internal and external as well. Internal, for example, we could be doing some thinking about what our prior experiences are with some of these products or brands. So, for example, in the picture, you can see this gentleman who is shopping at a grocery store for soda, and as you're going through the aisle, one type of personal sources will be just my prior experiences with these brands. So there might be several brands that I've already tasted in the past. There might be some brands that maybe I have tasted and I don't remember, and there might be others that are new to me, right? So those will be personal sources of information that I will use in this information search stage. And there could be some commercial sources, Like for example, as I'm walking through the aisle, I can gather information about the products that are present on the shelves, for example, about their prices, or maybe if I'm somebody that is worried about maybe some health repercussions of the product, I will be looking at each of the products and their labels and what is their content of different ingredients and maybe macronutrients. Um, and there are many different types of sources that we can actually use for information. A lot of shoppers nowadays, when they are shopping in the store, not only they use information from the actual store, but you can pull your cell phone, and by looking in a cell phone, maybe you can read reviews in Yelp about how different people like the different products that they may or might not have actually used in the past. Okay. And after we have what we consider to be sufficient information to make our decision, what we do is we start evaluating the alternatives or different options that we actually have uh, for satisfying this need that we have noticed. The evaluation of alternatives could be something that happens really quickly and could be very simplistic. It could be just that we use one or two attributes and we order the products in that regard. For example, you might consider only using one attribute like price and basically make a simple choice based on that. Or you might be trading off between the different attributes, like we have this gentleman in the picture in that slide, which is wondering whether he should actually have a piece of cake or an apple, because the trade-off in this case will be between flavor and maybe health and calorie content. And after we've made that decision based on the different criteria that the consumers will actually use for decision making, then the question is, do I actually go ahead and buy a product or not? Right? Oftentimes, there might be a disconnect between the actual intention that I've created based on my evaluation process. So I've ranked order maybe the products from the one that I prefer the most to the one that I prefer the least based on that criteria. But when it comes down to making the actual decision, uh, the intention and the decision may be different. This will happen, for example, if I go to the store and the product is actually not available in the shelf, even though I've already decided which one I'm going to buy because of unexpected situations, like, for example, a stock out. I will not actually be able to make that purchase, even though my intention was to do so. Another factor that could influence my decision making, even though my intentions internally will be clear, will be the attitudes that I'm portraying towards others or from other groups that I may be part of. Like, for example, if I'm a college student, even though I might like a certain group, uh, music group, I might not actually uh, use that particular group for music when I'm with my peers because it might not be considered a cool group or something that it's appropriate for somebody that is at this particular stage or this part of this college. And finally, after we've actually made a decision about a purchase, what happens oftentimes is that we discover once that we get to live with the product for a little while, or better said, that we need to spend some time thinking about that decision we made, that there is a little bit of regret. Regret is this negative emotion that we actually feel when there is a disconnect between what we think will be the ideal decision and the one that we actually made. And this is commonly occurring when we have many different choices. If there is only one or two choices, it's less likely that you will actually show this negative feeling. One of the most powerful negative feelings uh, it's cognitive dissonance. So cognitive dissonance is the discomfort that it's caused by the conflict between the options that you have chosen and the ones that you didn't choose. So if there were many choices that you could have made, so if you go to your grocery store and there are 100 different salad dressings, making sure that you indeed chose the perfect salad dressing for this occasion might actually be more difficult than if there were only one or two options. So because of that, when you actually go back home, you might be wondering, did I indeed uh, make the right choice or not? Is this the perfect salad dressing for my party? Um, One variable that is particularly important and should be measured post-purchase is customer satisfaction, and that's going to give us an idea about, whether customers are actually making better choices or not. In general, and there are different ways of measuring customer satisfaction, uh, but most of the time it's something that it's measured quite widely in pretty much every consumer packaged goods and consumer products in general. Okay, finally, when it comes down to buying products, a process that is slightly different, it's how people buy products that are new to them. These are products that may actually entail some sort of innovation, oftentimes associated with technology, but it doesn't have to be necessarily so. These are just products that are truly new for the customer. This is the first time buying a product. So, for example, a new product could be because technologically it just was launched. So, in this case, that could be, for example, uh, the idea of smart foldable smartphones. They were not foldable smartphones before, and now they're starting to appear in the marketplace. So being a new product, getting to the stage where you actually decide to make the purchase, there is a set of processes that are going to go in place beforehand. We're going to discuss now a little bit. But when I said new product, this could also be happening in a situation where the product is not new for the marketplace, but it's also new for the consumer. Like, for example, when you have your first baby and you now get to buy diapers, which is probably a product category that you have not purchased before. So when I'm talking about new products, this is just broadly speaking. Okay, so how does this adoption of new products happen? We're going to outline a little bit the process that happens with most consumers. And you start by first becoming aware that the product exists in the marketplace, because obviously, if you're not aware that the product actually exists, you can actually go and buy it, right? But after this awareness starts, uh, the question is there enough interest uh, from this new product or service for you to actually consider it or not? And after there is sufficient interest in your part, we're going to move into try to evaluate whether the product will actually be a good fit for me as a consumer. There might be a situation where this evaluation will be substantively helped by trial, especially if it's a product where being able to tell what the advantages of the product are before trying it is particularly difficult. This is an example from a tech industry. You could see this, for example, with high definition TV. So if you are thinking about maybe buying a new flat screen TV with 4K definition, the question is how much better is 4K definition than 1080p, which is the traditional standard before that for high definition. So how much better is 4K than 1080p? Maybe through trial, maybe going to a store and actually seeing two TV side by side, one with 1080p and another one with 4K, will actually enable you to make a better decision about whether you should actually go ahead and invest in 4K. And finally, after you've made your evaluation based on your criteria, maybe helped by trial, you go ahead and make a decision as to whether to adopt the product, meaning buy the product or not. Not all customers are the same when it comes down to buying new products, and what we're going to do is we're going to talk about 5 different groups of customers. We're going to talk about innovators. We're going to talk about early adopters. We're going to talk about mainstream customers, and those are going to be divided between early and late mainstream. And finally, we're going to discuss lagging adopters or laggards. So here in this diagram, you can see how these different types of customers jump into the market of new products at different stages. So notice that in the x-axis, we have the time since adoption. So 0 is when the product is actually launched in the market. Okay, so this is the first time when that product can actually buy by any consumers at all. And here in the other axis, we have the percentage of share of the adopters. Notice that the most you could have is 100% adoption. That will mean that every potential customer will have already bought that product. So you can see, for example, when it comes down to cell phones in the US, right now the adoption rate of cell phones is in the high 90s. So almost everybody has a cell phone, right? Now, notice that at different time, we have different people jumping into the market. So first come the innovators. This is a small group of customers that tend to be risk takers. They are basically not risk averse. They don't mind taking chances with products that are new, with technologies that are new, with things that may or may not work really well. They are also not very price sensitive because usually early on at these stages products tend to be expensive. And innovators are happy to jump in even when the product is expensive and not necessarily a proven product. Then come early adopters. They are also interested in the product category, maybe to a lesser degree than innovators are, and they are also not as price sensitive as well. And as you can see, the addition of these two customers is about 15-16% of the marketplace. It's a small percentage, but they are essential for the product to actually become successful. And then we actually have the mainstream group. This is when the product or service starts becoming commonplace, and the early mainstream is the absolute key for this product to become successful. That's when the product initially goes mainstream. And if you can cross this threshold between, convincing people that are inherently risk takers to the ones that are maybe more risk averse, like the case of the mainstream, that's when the product starts becoming commonplace and it actually becomes successful. Products that are unsuccessful in the marketplace is usually because they fail to make this jump. And then finally, we have here the lagging adopters or laggards in other terminology that is widely used, referring to this group. And these are people that are just the opposite, right? They are very, very risk averse. They only buy the product at the last minute once that everybody has already proven that the product is worthwhile. And at this point, prices tend to be a lot lower, by the way. And because of that, these people also tend to be a lot more price sensitive. So they wait until last minute once that the prices have actually come down for the product to actually jump in. And finally, we're going to discuss what factors determine whether a product is actually successful in the marketplace, a new product. So, and the first factor to determine this, and probably the most important, is relative advantage of this product. What that means is relative to the other existing solutions, how is this new product going to satisfy the needs of the customers better? So, for example, right now, a lot of the cell phone carriers are working on their 5G networks, which are promising much faster connection speeds, and this is going to theoretically enable video content on demand all the time, and make things a lot better from a user standpoint. And the question is, how much faster is this versus the 4G and 4G LTE, which is the technology that most users have right now? And basically, as customers realize the advantages that 5G has relative to 4G and whether they are actually worthwhile, this relative advantage which will dictate how quickly these 5G networks actually spread during the marketplace. And then we have compatibility. This refers to uh, whether you can use the old assets that the customers have in the same product category with the new product. So for example, if Sony launches PlayStation 5 this November, which is probably what will happen, November 2020, the question of compatibility is, can I use my old video games that I bought for my PS4 with my new, if I buy PS5? And compatibility, obviously, the more compatible a product is with the existing ecosystem of products and services, the more likely you are to adopt the new product, because that will mean that for you to play your old games, you don't also need to keep your old system. Okay. Then we have complexity. Complexity refers to whether the product is simple to use. In general, complexity makes consumer adoption more difficult because there is more learning that needs to take place before that product it's actually used and deployed properly. So because of that, high levels of complexity is associated with a lower rate of adoption. Next, we have the visibility. This is important in products where trial could be important. The visibility is whether the product can be broken down into smaller parts, and hence, once that is broken into smaller parts, you might be able to actually either try it uh, or, if not try, at least buy a smaller quantity of it to make sure that making that purchase is actually worthwhile. So this enables you to reduce the risk associated with the purchase, and because of that, increase the rate of adoption of that new product. And finally, we have communicability. And this is how easy it is to convey the main benefits of the product or service to the customer. The easier it is to tell a story of why this product is going to make better the life of the customer, and the easier it will be to convince them, and hence the higher the rate of adoption that you will have.